We're pleased to welcome Alberta Premier Danielle Smith to Forum Dialogue. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So before we talk about the MOU, and we'll talk about it extensively, let's discuss a little bit about the recall petitions, which is taking place right now. 19-year MLAs, and I think you're the first Alberta Premier to face a recall petition since, 1937? Who do you think is behind this? What's going on?
Well, I can tell you that we didn't have recall legislation for a long time, and then my predecessor, when he got elected, he brought it in, and he borrowed from what was in British Columbia. They're the only other province that have recalls, and their legislation has allowed for about 30 over the last 30 years. So I think we just sort of figured it wouldn't be abused in the way that it has been. I kind of look at it almost like a new form of the longest ballot kind of activism, where there's clearly abusive process, and because you have to remember, how do you get a petition started? $500. You write 100 words about why you don't like your MLA, get a CFO and a bank account, and you can start a petition. The real challenge, of course, is getting the 60% of the people who voted in the last election to sign on to it. So we're going to watch and see what happens, and we'll know the result of that in the first month or so of 2026 to see if any of them are successful.
So your thoughts, who might be behind this?
Oh, it's pretty clear. I mean, they're fairly forthright about it. It was the union leadership of the AFL.
Want to bring the government down, right?
And they said so. I mean, they said that they wanted to take down the government. Public Interest Alberta is a coalition of all of the union leadership, and they were unhappy with some decisions that we made to order teachers back to work. But we allowed the right to strike for 3.5 weeks. Kids were getting impacted. And when the right to strike bumps up against the right of kids to have an education, we chose to get the kids back in school. So I think people are generally pretty happy that the kids were able to finish out the school year without losing a whole lot of their progress. And so we'll see whether or not that anger is still out there.
Now let's talk about the MOU signed between your government and the Carney government here, Ottawa. You know, many people in Alberta are celebrating. A lot of people in the energy sector are celebrating. But at the same time, when the Conservative Party of Canada brought it forth on Parliament Hill, the Liberals voted it down, including Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, who signed the MOU with you.
Well, if you'd put the full MOU towards the Parliament, it might have been a different result. That's what we did in the legislature, is we asked for the legislature to give an endorsement of the MOU, and it was unanimous. So I would say that we always said it was a grand bargain. It's a package. It includes some environmental policies like the Pathways Alliance project, which is a decarbonization project. It includes carbon pricing. But
nuclear as well?
It includes nuclear, interties. There are some things in there that I think those who put the environment as a priority would like, but there's also things in there that put for people who put the economy as a priority, like getting pipelines built, making sure that the net zero power regs had been repealed so that we could get new natural gas power generation built and AI data centers built. So when and of course a new pipeline to the Northwest BC coast. So when I look at the package as a whole, we were looking for a win-win. I think we found that. And so if the full MOU had been put forward, might have been a different result. As I have said before, if Elizabeth May just cherry-picked the things that she liked out of there, I would have expected the Liberal government to vote that down too.
So how important is it really to get 1 million barrels of bitumen per day through to the Asian markets? Because that's, I guess, a lot of Asian nations are quite hungry for energy.
Yeah, well, I want to see it go in all directions, north, east, west, and south. I mean, I think we all know that the easiest pathway would be south. The U.S. president has said that he wants to have a reboot of the Keystone XL pipeline, so we know that he's interested in seeing more energy come down. However, we also know that there are perils of having only one customer. Before we had the Trans Mountain pipeline, when the system got congested, our differential got blown out, and we ended up having to sell our oil at dramatic discounts. With Trans Mountain pipeline, it's now reduced that discount. And so now that the Asian markets are getting used to our product, they want more of it. I've gone to Japan and Korea. I've met with the Chinese ambassador to Canada as well, and they would also take whatever it is that we're prepared to sell them. So that's why I think if we're truly, as a nation, interested in doubling our exports to non-USA, part of the great opportunity is energy exports. And then when you create the pathway for energy exports, you create the pathway for food exports and fiber exports and all of your other basic materials. So I think that a Northwest BC Coast pipeline is going to be the best for all of Canada when it comes to the volumes, the revenue it will generate, and the objective of achieving new markets.
But how are you going to get Premier David Eby on board? BC Premier David Eby. First Nations people who, as well, are quite opposed to this pipeline there are a lot of hurdles, regulatory hurdles as well. Will we actually see shovels in the ground?
Well,
There's a lot of resistance to this.
first, I would say the what is being put out there is the coastal First Nations being opposed. That is a particular advocacy group that doesn't represent anyone who has a direct role in making decisions for their people. So we are going to the decision makers, and those are the nations who have an elected mandate from their people, and they're wanting to continue the engagement and continue the conversation. So we have a new way of being able to support economic reconciliation. We call it our Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, where we underwrite the purchase of equity stakes in major projects so that those nations can earn an ongoing revenue stream. And that's what we're proposing is let's begin as partners and see if we can get equity partnership in a new pipeline. So that's one part. With Premier Eby, he and I agree on more than you may think. We agree that the Trans Mountain Pipeline needs to be optimized, another 360,000 barrels. We agree in the development of LNG exports, Silisms, LNG Canada 1 and 2, wood fiber and others. Though I can see that the BC government is very supportive of those, as are we, and Silisms in particular is going to probably have 60% of its export as Alberta gas, so we're very grateful for that. Port of Prince Rupert, we're seeing a doubling of our propane export capacity, so we're supportive of that. We've been working with Premier Eby on ammonia export, ammonia by rail to Prince Rupert. We want to see interties be built as well so that we can have electricity not only going up to his Golden Triangle to develop 6 new mines, but also to go back and forth between Alberta and British Columbia. And we're both supportive of seeing if we can add nuclear to that grid. So, yes, have a little bit more work to do on the pipeline to the Northwest BC coast for sure. But we're going to start from an area where we agree and hopefully build to that consensus.
Would Prime Minister Carney maybe consider rescinding, was it Bill C-48, the tanker ban?
In the MOU, he talked about having a carve-out. And so when you look at the tanker ban area, there's one port that just stands out among the others as being what has been described as probably the safest port in North America, and that's Port of Prince Rupert, right on the ocean. It's a straight run to get to the Asian markets, 8 to 10 days. The navigation is very straightforward as well. Whereas in Vancouver, it takes about 4 hours for a navigator to take a ship out into the open sea. In this one, it's only 2 hours. And so I think that because we do have an established port, which already is growing in exports from largely Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba products, it seems to me that's a good place to start. So we're going to be looking at trying to find the port that will address some of those safety concerns and that make the most sense. And that one is the one we're looking at.
Now, with the Memorandum of Understanding, Premier Smith, the deal says that your government must enact a high industrial carbon levy from $95 to $130 a ton on emissions and help build that major carbon capture project designed to really drive down greenhouse gases in the oil patch. Yep. Now, your constituency association president, Mitch Sylvester, said the MOU should basically be tossed because of the higher industrial carbon pricing. Your thoughts?
Well, look, we've had in the past over 125,000 members, so I suppose you could always find one of 125,000 members that might disagree. But what I will say is that this carbon price is a reduction from what the current plan is. The former Trudeau government they said that they would allow us to maintain our own carbon pricing at the provincial level, but that it was to go to $170 per ton by 2030. We froze it at 95, knowing that was just too high, too fast. And so 130 is a bit of a marker, I think, of us trying to find a compromise. We still have some work to do, and we will by April 1st to decide what the pathway is on how quickly we get to that $130 per ton mark. But I can tell you, it's just the biggest emitters who pay it. It's 700 of our biggest emitters. And when we went out and did a consultation about should we reduce that fee, keep it as it is, or scrap it altogether, the vast majority wanted to keep it. Only one had said to get rid of it altogether. And that's because our businesses have committed to investing in these technologies. And it's been a good mechanism going all the way back to 2007 to direct dollars to carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and hydrogen, and bitumen by on combustion, and a few other things. So I think that what we're doing is taking our cues from industry, who are the ones who are paying for it, and they are supportive of us continuing with the program at the provincial level.
Some would also argue, though, that hitting the industry hard and the bigger industry players also impacts a lot of Albertans who are working for those industries.
Well, I would say that there's two industries that are developing in Alberta. One is an industry that develops oil and gas, and the other is the industry that develops all of the other types of products that are going to be generated out of oil and gas. Hydrogen, we're already the biggest producer of hydrogen, and we're going to continue down that track. We are experts in drilling, and that drilling expertise has lent itself to a geothermal company that is now a geothermal company. They've got projects at scale around the world. It's also led to us doing an examination of what is in our brines. And so we've got an at-scale E3, which is lithium development out of the lithium that's in brines. And so all of this kind of innovation, I think, will lead to more jobs. So not only are we going to have the oil and gas jobs, but we'll also have all of these new industries, and that's a positive.
Let's talk about the Pathways project for just a moment here.
Yeah.
Now, how many tons of CO2 will be captured, and who's going to bear the cost?
I believe that the group of companies are responsible for something like 67 megatons a year. And so what their plan was, and they were the ones who presented this, was that they wanted to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. And it's a combination. One is a carbon trunk line, so carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And we have an agreement from the federal government that a portion of that can be used for enhanced oil recovery. We've got about 40 fields that could be rejuvenated using enhanced oil recovery in conventional basins. And so that would be one aspect. The other is fuel switching. And so the interties with nuclear, especially with our friends in Saskatchewan, that could be another way of creating both the power and the heat that are needed so that we can decarbonize on the production end. And then the last part is what is called direct air capture. And we've got 10 projects in central Alberta and Innisfail that are experimenting with different ways to capture CO2 from the atmosphere, which is really a chemistry exercise. We already do this. This is how we create fertilizer. We capture nitrogen from the air, mix it with natural gas, and has been able to create a vibrant fertilizer industry that has been able to feed 8 billion people on the planet. So I don't know what will come from us being able to capture CO2, but I do know that our innovators are really skilled at finding a way to turn a waste stream into a revenue stream. And so all of that is happening in Alberta.
Net zero by the year 2050. Is that really achievable?
I guess we'll see. I mean, the industry tells me that it is. The Pathways group of projects, our oil sands industry, which is the one of a large emitter. Our electricity generators tell me that it is as well. But I think we have to give some latitude for how we get there. I think the problem that we had with the old administration is their vision was that the entire economy would be operated from solar, wind, and batteries, because we don't have the kind of hydro resources as of other jurisdictions, and it can take decades for nuclear to develop. So I think what we have demonstrated is that there's different ways to be able to achieve that end, and I think that the approach that we're taking is a realistic one, and time will tell how quickly the innovation develops. But what I can tell you is it would have been impossible to do by 2030, and it would have been impossible to do by 2035. You can't just snap your fingers and allow for innovation to occur. You don't get to the iPhone 17 until you've developed iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. It's an iterative process. And I think we're well on our way. We already do have carbon capture projects at scale. We have many of those other industries I've mentioned already in development. And so 25 years out, it'll be pretty exciting to see where we're at.
So how close are we to nuclear energy here in Alberta?
I would say, we've signed on to a couple things. We signed on to an MOU for small modular reactors. And we're also in the middle of doing a consultation on large nuclear reactors as well. The economics of the large nuclear make a lot more sense, because if you think about where we're at right now, for 1,000 megawatts of power, it costs about $2 or $3 billion in Alberta for natural gas. It costs about $16 billion for hydroelectric. Cost about $16 billion for traditional nuclear, and cost about $45 billion for small modular. So at the moment, in our market, what makes the most sense is continuing to do natural gas, but I'm very open-minded to see if there's another project that would fit into our mix.
So let's circle back to the Pathways project here, Premier. How will the cost of pathways and carbon taxes really impact competitiveness and the ability to attract investment, which is key?
Well, I can tell you that the Americans may have taken a bit of a different turn, but American politics being what they are, it could also take a turn in a different direction after the next federal election, or even after the midterms. And so, what I will say is that we're still seeing in Europe an appetite to decarbonize. We're seeing that appetite in Asia, and those are our two biggest new markets that we're looking for. But I have taken recent trips to the Middle East, and I can tell you that Saudi Arabia, as well as the United Arab Emirates, are both going down exactly the same pathway we are. They're developing carbon capture, utilization, and storage. They're developing nature-based solutions, building mangroves and other types of ways to capture CO2. And they're also developing direct air capture. So some of the biggest oil producers in the world are doing the exact same things we are.
You talked about Saudi Arabia. How can we convince other regions of Canada, including central and eastern Canada, that Alberta oil is needed and not Saudi oil?
I think we have convinced them. I mean, when you look at the...
But we don't have that west-east pipeline.
If you look at the discussion that we've been having in the last year, especially since Donald Trump got elected, everyone is talking about how do we support each other, trade more with each other, and how do we find new markets. And when you ask regular Canadian citizens, you end up with 70% or more who say, yes, we do need to build pipelines. And it's a majority, even in places like Quebec and in British Columbia. And so that's what I look at, is that we've won the argument with the people. Now, there are different ways that you can feed those refineries on the East Coast. We can take our product all the way down to the Gulf Coast, and then we can bring it back up by ship and go to the East Coast. You can do it by rail. There's a project that is being proposed to do oil by rail to Sydney, Nova Scotia. We could also build icebreakers and build a port either in James Bay or Churchill, and then come up and over that way as well. So there's lots of different ways to get there. And I think I saw the Quebec Premier say, you know what, if there was a refinery here, maybe we could make the case that we could have a pipeline here as well. So I think that what is happening is that reality is setting in, that people understand reliability and affordability are central values. We have to work on emissions, but we can't sacrifice reliability and affordability for that. And so that's what I think the new conversation is, and we're prepared to work with whoever wants to work with us.
So Ottawa is prepared to designate the pipeline as a project of national interest, Premier, that will trigger powers under the Building Canada Act, which could possibly mean that the tankers associated with transporting the oil, like we talked about, could be exempted from C-48. But honestly, do you think that will happen? Because there's so much hesitations, so many people against this, right?
I think we have to realize that for the past 3 years, what I've been advocating for was getting rid of the emissions cap, which we know is a production cap, and getting rid of the net zero power regs. And why was that important? Well, if you have an emissions cap that you have to achieve by 2030 or 2035, and you don't have the technology, the only way to achieve it is to shut in production. And we were facing a future where we'd have to shut in 2 million barrels a day of production. Same with the net zero power regs. If you have to be net zero by 2035 and the technology isn't available, you have to turn off your natural gas plants or your executives go to jail. No one was going to build under those circumstances. So if all that we'd gotten the federal government to agree to were those two things, repealing those two things, we would have been jumping for joy. We just happened to have a list of 9 bad laws we wanted to get rid of. 7 of them were addressed in the MOU. And in addition to that, we got a commitment that the Pathways project can proceed right alongside a new bitumen pipeline to the North Coast for the same reasons, is because we need to develop new markets. So I feel very confident that the Prime Minister is going to live up to his word in the MOU. I've been saying trust but verify. We obviously have to keep on pushing, and we want to see action rather than just words. But we are going to put our proposal, our technical proposal, into the Major Projects Office. We're targeting July 1st for that, and then we'll see what the response is. But I'm very hopeful that we finally turned a page on this.
You know, speaking of response, I was quite shocked when Prime Minister Carney was in Calgary, received a standing ovation when he was talking to the Chamber President as well. Mm-hmm. When was the last time you could say that a Liberal Prime Minister in Calgary received a standing ovation?
I don't know if you can pinpoint a date, but I can tell you what you are seeing. I think that was a genuine. I think it was a genuine expression of relief, because we've had a lost decade of 10 years, and everybody feels that acutely, and we don't want to see another lost decade. So I'm glad that he got that reaction.
When are you really hoping to have shovels in the ground, realistically speaking?
Well, I can tell you that by getting rid of the emissions cap, we are going to see a number of what they call open seasons on different pipelines. Enbridge is talking about 400,000 barrels a day on their main line. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is talking about optimizing another 360,000 barrels. The South Bow, which owns the old Keystone assets, they're talking about a significant new pipeline to the United States. And there are many other projects. So those can all go ahead. And because optimizations are a lot easier, I would expect those to get to market very quickly before 2030. A brand new pipeline is obviously going to take a little bit longer. I imagine the Major Projects Office approval might take a year. 2 years then is when the time frame gets set to get through all the approvals, and then the building. So I would imagine that it would be commissioned in the early 30s. That's what I'd be thinking would be the time frame for that.
Now, what about the cost overruns? Who would bear the brunt of that?
It's going to be a private sector build.
So taxpayers wouldn't be footing the bill for any of that?
I think it would be a failure of the process if taxpayers had to build another pipeline. The reason why Kinder Morgan got backed out is because they couldn't see a pathway to get the project built. The federal government stepped in because it was the last one standing. And I think we saw with the cost overruns there that governments aren't really the best entity to do these kinds of major projects. So what we want to do is walk the pathway so that we can work out all of the different issues with First Nations, with landowners, with the federal government, with the regulatory. But we want the technical expertise and the dollars to come from the private sector. And that's one of the commitments in the MOU.
We haven't seen any new pipelines, major pipelines, over the past 20 years. So this is quite ambitious. Many people argue, critics will say there are going to be way too many regulatory hurdles that we won't even see this happen in our lifetime. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say that we just have to have some hope that
faith?
Some hope that the federal government realizes. And I mean, I've told Prime Minister Carney that the separatist movement in Alberta was created by his predecessor. And I think he's the one who can take the wind out of it by actually living up to these commitments. I mean, I take that movement very seriously. It's born of a lot of frustration about how Central Canada and Ottawa in particular has treated our province. So Mark Carney, he at least has a little bit of history here. He had a period of time where he grew up here. And I believe he's genuine in wanting to heal that divide.
Let's talk about that relationship then between Alberta and Ottawa compared to Alberta and Ottawa when Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister. You said it was the dark ages, the decade of darkness, right? How has it really evolved or changed? And can we work with Ottawa now?
I would say there's a few things that have changed. The fact that the former Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, quit caucus or quit cabinet, I think that's a demonstration that there was genuine movement away from those damaging policies. The other thing I'd say is the world is very different than it was even 5 years ago. When you look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when you look at the instability in the Middle East, when you see the election of Donald Trump, when you see how all of our trading partners and friends and allies have faced issues of reliability for energy and reliability for power and spiking power prices, which has led to affordability crises all over the world. When people are hurting, politicians have to respond to that. And you cannot have constant inflation of everything from your home heating to your power to the transportation fuel you use to your groceries to your cost of living associated with your rent and your housing. You can't have that and ignore it. And you ignored it at your peril. So I think that's what the world realized, is that they were moving too far, too fast, and it was hurting regular people. So I think it is genuine. I think that that's been a real change in the last 5 years.
Many governments in the world right now are really embracing green energy, solar and wind and so forth. But Alberta seems to be like, hell bent, we're going for oil and gas. We're going to keep going, with a lot of the oil and gas sector here, with the energy sector. Can they actually live in harmony here in the province?
Yeah, I think it's a mischaracterization. I mean, what we saw when I came in is because of all these bad laws, the only power that was lining up to get built was solar and wind, 23,000 megawatts of it. But solar only works 10% of the time. Wind only works 30% of the time. So what are you supposed to put on your system when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing? That we almost had a complete failure of our power grid in the depths of winter when it was a minus 30 because they had to turn off the wind turbines because there can be mechanical failure, and of course there was no sun. And batteries only work for an hour. So you can't tell people, sorry, just sit and freeze in the dark until morning. That is just not the way, people die under those circumstances. So that was how dire it got. And that's why we took a very strong stance and passed a sovereignty Act motion under our Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act to say, if we do not get movement on these power rules, we're going to have to create a crown corporation and we're going to have to build it ourselves. So that was the reason why we had to do that. Now, when I talk about bringing on a responsible amount of solar and wind, what that means is you have to have natural gas backup so that your plants can come up as solar and wind go down. And that is the approach that we're taking. We had to put a pause on everything in order to make sure that we could change the market so that we rewarded that kind of reliability. But you're still seeing solar, wind, and natural gas projects moving forward, and I expect that will continue.
So this bitumen pipeline going through northern British Columbia, it becomes a reality. Obviously, you're going to have the private investor. They're going to want their cut.
Yeah.
Mark Carney, our Prime Minister, says the people of BC need their cut. First Nations need their cut. Alberta needs their cut. There are a lot of partners here. A lot of people want a piece of that pie.
Yeah, well, if you look at the Trans Mountain Pipeline, it gives you an idea, or even the Enbridge. One of the first deals that we underwrote with the AIOC was for a system of pipelines up in northern Alberta. 23 nations, I believe, are partners on that. And so, yeah, you can have a pipeline that is owned, maybe in part by BC nations, Alberta nations, as well as the British Columbia government. Maybe you have a toll. I believe they have a toll already on the Trans Mountain Pipeline that benefits the BC government. So there are some creative things that can be done. The thing to remember about a bitumen pipeline, even at today's prices, it generates 20 billion a year in annual revenue. And so that's why it's so significant. It's a very high value product that operates 24/7, 365 days a year, and that is needed for shipments around the world. So there is maybe a lot of mouths to feed, but it also generates a lot of revenue for to be able to do that.
So Premier Smith, has your government really looked into risk analysis on whether U.S. energy companies, which are big players in the oil and gas sector, would maybe scale back investment if the withdrawal actually takes place?
Well, I would say that we're going to watch with great interest what happens in the United States. My understanding is that those producers down there need $60 oil to continue their production. And obviously, you've got a U.S. president that wants to keep driving the price down. Our energy players can make money at $37 a barrel. And we have now, I think, a dedicated group of companies that's prepared to take the long view on it. So when you look at the long view, by 2050, very likely 125 million barrels of oil are going to be needed by the world economy. Canada wants to be a larger share of that growing market, and Alberta's at the center of it. So I'm pretty excited about what the future holds.
How about the potential for LNG as well and shipping that out as a strong economic driver for Canada and for Alberta?
No doubt, natural gas is also going to at least double in production. It's really going to be the fastest way that we can bring AI data centers on, and AI data centers are going to be essential. AI is going to be an AI assist is really going to transform every single component of our economy. And I think that we're going to be at the lead of that as well. And of course, everyone in the world wants to do the same thing. There are a number of countries that want to switch away from coal to natural gas-fired electricity and see the emissions reduction. We can do that. But it's also going to be what is now being called a foundation fuel for those 700 million people on the planet that currently don't have access to electricity at all. So there's going to be a big transformation and a big growth, and we have both of them. And I'm pretty excited that we're finally building the infrastructure we need to get everything to market.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, thanks so much for joining us today on Forum Dialogue.
You bet, my pleasure.